Let's bring in retired Air Force Special Operations Commander Major Glenn Ignacio. Major, it's great to have you. So some of these Russian troops that we're hearing about are now even in retreat. So if NATO actually granted Ukraine some of these weapons that Zelensky asked for today, do you think, even if it's a small amount, it could possibly tip the balance of this war into the favor of Ukraine?
I think right now you see the operations and you see the great resolve of the Ukrainian military pushing back on the Russians. Now, we've given them a lot of lethal force that are anti-tank weapons and other things which are critical. The one thing that people talk about is no-fly zone, but that's actually very dangerous. It would really be great if they could also get the additional MiGs from Poland and be able to protect themselves from the air as well.
Yeah, it was interesting as much what Zelensky asked for today, Major, is what he didn't ask for, which was, as you pointed out, the no-fly zone and also NATO membership he didn't bring up. I was wondering if you think that's because he knows it's probably off the table, or if maybe he doesn't think he needs it anymore.
Right. I mean, the idea that, membership of NATO at this point, it's too late with
Sure.
a conflict already in place. But the no-fly zone, let me make it real quick on this. It's a great concept, but in execution, it's a little bit more difficult because you're talking about aviators, American and others from NATO, that would be shooting at Russian aircraft and killing Russians. The other thing is the air defense systems. We'd have to protect ourselves, and if we take out an air defense system, we would be killing another Russian soldier. So that's direct combat. So it's easy to say we want a no-fly zone, but in actuality, you are deploying U.S. forces and U.S. aviators in harm's way.
Yeah, well, let's get a little more on that, Major, because we do have some Newsnation polling that we wanted to ask you about. We asked Americans if they would support a no-fly zone, and 68% said yes. And this was surprising to me. 51% said yes, even if it meant NATO entering the war. So there's more. As for the price of the war for Russia, have they paid enough? 59 told us that it was too weak. And has the U.S. done enough to help Ukraine? 41% told us no, too little. So the question on this one, Major, is do you think this gives President Biden perhaps some cover to do more if he wanted to? Or, as you just alluded to a minute ago, do you think the risks of escalation are just too great?
Well, I think the important thing is Putin looks for power, confidence, and strength. That's always the way he's played it, and you got to project that back. But there's a few things we need to look at here. Is the way that the operation has gone in basic combat. If Ukraine was a member of NATO, you'd have NATO behind it. Now, the thing that's really interesting is that if Putin didn't do the indiscriminate killing of civilians, it would be a combat operation and civilians would be out of the way, and these are lawful combatants like war. The idea that he's doing indiscriminate killing and wiping out so many people, and there's no reason to be attacking apartment buildings and homes, that brings a whole different focus to this. It reminds me almost of what was going on in Kosovo, and that is something that is going to get the international community interested in this operation. So maybe not just NATO, but what about an international coalition? So it's not just NATO dissolves that kind of threat, but it's a coalition of other countries, including NATO.
So we mentioned off the top, the U.S. and the Kremlin haven't talked in weeks, and there's concern that it could lead to a miscalculation on the battlefield. There are a couple ways to look at this, Major, I guess, that may not surprise people because we're sort of indirectly, at least, involved in a war. But at the same point, we would maybe be using back channels to communicate with Russia right now when we are indirectly involved. Would surprise you. What do you make of the fact that we're not in communication?
That's very dangerous. And the reason for it is the miscalculation of things, activities and events. You have the Russians attacking the Ukrainians up to the border. So the idea that knowing something's happening and it's not accidentally being shot into NATO or intentionally being shot into NATO would also be, dissolved to get rid of that threat. There's also been reports of UAVs, the unmanned vehicles, that went down in Poland, I believe, even further to the west outside of Ukraine a couple of days ago. Now, you saw the other, was about a week ago, India accidentally launched a missile by accident into Pakistan. Now, imagine if that happened into NATO from Russia, and there's no communication. That's a trigger right there, and it's very dangerous and definitely needs to be dissolved. It's been in the past. Don't know why that's not happening now.
Retired Air Force Special Operations Commander Major Glenn Ignacio. Major, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for the time.